Week 16 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire this week. So right now in the second week of most playoffs for fantasy owners, in a crucial week where you're just trying to find any way to keep your season going and staying alive to get to the championship. These quarterbacks possibly can help owners in deeper leagues, or even if you're dealing with an injury like a Justin Herbert at this point of the year and you're just going to stream quarterbacks. First quarterback's Gardner Minshew of the Indianapolis Colts. Gardner Minshew, he's been a quarterback that's been on the radar on and off all season here, ever since Anthony Richardson went down very early in the year. So the last few weeks for Minshew, he's definitely been serviceable. Week 13 at Tennessee, 312 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, a fumble loss. Week 14 at Cincinnati, 240 pass yards, a touchdown, an INT, a 2-point conversion. And Week 15 versus a pretty sound Steelers defense, 215 pass yards and 3 touchdowns. So Week 16, a great matchup at the Atlanta Falcons. That give up the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. I know Michael Pittman got concussed in that ball game. We don't know if he's going to be ready for the Week 16 matchup, but if he is, obviously he's a huge piece to this offense. But even when Pittman went down in the ball game, guys like DJ Montgomery stepped up and played a good game as well, and Goodson out of the backfield. So right now, Gardner Minshew, I know he's a gunslinger. I know he's a quarterback that's trying to turn the football over as well a lot, but he takes chances and he moves the football down the field more times than not, and he's available in 75% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback's Derek Carr of the New Orleans Saints. So Derek Carr, it's been an up and down first season for him in New Orleans, and he's been dealing with a lot of injuries, but the last few weeks the numbers have been pretty decent. Week 14 versus Carolina, 119 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an INT. In Week 15 versus the Giants, 218 pass yards and 3 touchdowns. So Week 16 here, a quick turnaround at the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday Night Football, where their secondary's middle of the pack. We just saw Sam Howell, even though I know it's some garbage time, have a good ball game versus the Rams. And Derek Carr is amongst the league leaders in terms of putting up yards for the most part this season. So right now, if you're in a pinch at quarterback, Carr's got a decent matchup where the Rams give up the 11th most points to QBs on the season, available in 61% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback's Jake Browning of the Cincinnati Bengals. So very surprising to me, Browning's still out there right now in 53% of fantasy leagues. Obviously, this is the last week for owners to go out there and get him. And I know Week 16 is a pretty tough matchup at the Steelers that give up the 6th least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. But like I said early in the video, Minshew just went out there and put up a nice ball game versus Steelers defense. So the last few weeks for Browning, Week 14 versus Indianapolis, 275 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an INT, a rushing touchdown. A Week 15 versus Minnesota in that come from behind victory, 324 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an INT. So I know T. Higgins had a monster game where we didn't see much out of him all season until that one. And Jamar Chase now, he's banged up as well with the dislocated shoulder. So we don't know if Chase is going to play in the game. And obviously that's a huge hit for this offense if Chase is going to miss time, which I believe he will, but another Saturday game. But anyway, Browning's going out there. He's spreading the football out to guys like Tanner Hudson, T. Higgins, Timothy Irwin. And I think this week here, once again, even if Chase is in or out of the lineup, he could go out there and put up some decent numbers. The next quarterback's Nick Mullins of the Minnesota Vikings. So Nick Mullins, it was a mixed bag of results for him in last week's ball game for Mullins at Cincinnati, but he did finish with 303 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. So Week 16, a good matchup. The lines that give up the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So Mullins, obviously great weapons. Justin Jefferson returned in this game. He looked good. Jordan Addison, what a ball game it was for him in this one as well, going over 100 yards and finding the end zone. And then when you got one of the best tight ends in the league, like TJ Hawkinson, just a lot of weapons on this offense. And Nick Mullins, I know he turned the football over, but he still went out there and made plays and had a decent fantasy day with 21 fantasy points. So right now, if you need a quarterback, he's out there in 96% of fantasy leagues. And the 5th and final quarterback I looked at off the wall is Joe Flacco of the Cleveland Browns. Joe Flacco, believe it or not, he's gone out there with 20 or more fantasy points in the last 3 weeks since he's been a starter for this Brown team. Week 13 at the Rams, 254 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception. Week 14 versus Jacksonville, 311 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, and interception, a fumble loss. In Week 15, it was a bad game in terms of turning the football over, but he still put up good yards versus the Bears in the come-from-behind victory, 374 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 INTs. So Week 16, a good matchup with the Houston Texans. I give up the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. Just Joe Flacco, he's got confidence. He's got good weapons, Amari Cooper, David Njoku, Elijah Moore. Jerome Ford out of the backfield. And this week versus a beatable Texans secondary, I think Flacco, once again for deeper leagues, could go out there and help fantasy owners. Available in 76% of fantasy leagues. That's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the waiver wire for week 16 of the fantasy football season.